We probably should get started. We have an hour. So my name is Claudia Brown. I'm retired from the State Historic Preservation Office at the end of 2018 and then came back the next year, and I've been working part-time on reviewing National Register nominations and working on Rosenwald schools. So this morning I have the pleasure of being your first presenter. My State Historic Preservation Office colleagues are going to tell you about how we can help you as you strive to identify, preserve, and protect our state's Rosenwald schools. And I'm starting off with a brief overview of the early 20th century Rosenwald Schools program in North Carolina, and then the efforts to identify our remaining schools prior to our current mapping project, which Beth King is going to discuss following me. You probably all know about Julius Rosenwald, born in 1862 to German immigrant parents in Springfield, Illinois. After dropping out of high school, he was apprenticed to his uncles who were clothing manufacturers in New York City, and while there he became friends with Henry Goldman and other prominent businessmen. He worked his way through a series of clothing companies, ended up in Chicago, and soon his company was the principal supplier of men's clothing for Sears, Roebuck and Company. Through a series of investments, mergers, and buyouts, he became the CEO of Sears in 1908. Once the company's success was secure, J.R., as he was known, could turn his attention to philanthropy. He became good friends with Goldman's partner, Paul J. Sachs, Goldman & Sachs, and during their many visits to each other's homes, they usually discussed America's social situation and agreed that the plight of African Americans was the most serious of issues in the United States. Sachs introduced J.R. to Booker T. Washington, and within a year, Washington and J.R. were building a close relationship. In 1912, J.R. became a member of Tuskegee Institute's Board of Directors, a position all right, where was I? Hold on a second. I got distracted. I've lost my cursor. Okay, here we go. Anyway, he became a director of Tuskegee Institute's Board of Directors, a position he held until his death in 1932. J.R.'s entry into large-scale philanthropy occurred in 1912 when he celebrated his 50th birthday by giving away close to $700,000, or about $16 million in today's currency. Of that initial $700,000, $25,000 went to Tuskegee, and Booker T. Washington shrewdly set aside part of it to launch a new experiment that he thought would interest J.R., a $2,100 effort to build new schools in parts of Alabama where little or no education was being offered to rural blacks. Washington's careful documentation of his efforts captivated J.R., and soon he and Washington were ramping up the program. While J.R.'s interest was part of a long tradition of Northern philanthropic support for Southern black education, that support had mostly been for teacher training through funding for black colleges, whereas his focus was on the facilities. The endeavor to build rural schools for African Americans was among the largest programs administered by the fund that he would create, and at J.R.'s death, his largesse, $4.3 million, had helped build more than 5,300 schools all across the South. In 1932, 35% of all black children in the South, or 27% of all black children in the U.S., attended a Rosenwald school. And while it may not be readily apparent in this map showing the locations of Rosenwald schools, North Carolina had more Rosenwald-funded assisted projects than any other state, a total of 818. About 790 of those were schools, and the rest were teacher homes and shop buildings. Only 7 counties in North Carolina did not have a Rosenwald school. All of those were in the West, where there were relatively few African Americans, with the exception of Granville County in the Piedmont. These photos were taken in 1928 at the dedication of the 4,000th school, the two-story brick building erected on the campus of the Barry O'Kelly School in the Method community, now part of Raleigh. In the early 20th century, the educational needs of North Carolina's African Americans were barely being met. Our first governor of the 20th century was Charles B. Aycock, who was known as the education governor for dedicating himself to improving public education in the state during his term of 1901 to 1905. One source states that 690 schools were built during his administration. He also was a leading spokesman for the white supremacy campaigns of 1898 and 1900 and promoted the enactment of Jim Crow laws. There's no denying that improvements in education for blacks lagged far behind those for whites in the first few years of the 20th century, when fully 1/3 of North Carolina's population was black. According to the source that provided the figure of 690 schools built under Governor Aycock, only 99, or 14.3%, were for black students. The number of new schools was inadequate, and the condition of the pre-existing schools was very poor, as exemplified by this image. I don't think it's inaccurate to say that what Governor Aycock did for furthering education of white children, J.R. did for blacks many times over. In 1913, the first Rosenwald School was built in Lochapoka, Alabama, with some of that initial $25,000 that J.R. gave to Tuskegee. J.R. continued to make donations, and by the time Booker T. Washington died in 1915, 80 additional black schools had been built in Alabama and 2 adjoining states. In 1917, J.R. established the Julius Rosenwald Fund to continue his charitable activities. For the first 12 years, rural school construction in 14 southern states was the fund's primary focus. J.R. had 2 main reasons for donating to black education. The first, to stimulate public agencies to take a larger share of social responsibility. And second, to spur a pattern of cooperation that would bring lasting change beyond the life of the grant for schoolhouse construction. To this end, the state and county had to contribute to the building and maintain it as a regular part of the public school system. White citizens had to take an interest and contribute part of the money, and blacks had to make gifts of money or labor, usually both. In other words, what was donated to each community was seed money that had to be greatly overmatched. Initially, Tuskegee Institute staff administered the Rosenwald School program, but by 1920, the program had grown so large that it was more than the Tuskegee could handle. And J.R. created what he called his Southern office in Nashville, Tennessee, to oversee the program. The Rosenwald Fund stipulated that activities be coordinated through state education departments and offered each state a grant to help hire a black administrator to assist the designated Negro agent, who was white. The great success of the school program in North Carolina is due in no small part to the work of 3 men. The first of these was Nathan Carter Newbold, shown at upper left. He was a Negro agent for public school construction who made black education his life's work, building one of the largest black education staffs in the South and winning the respect of both fellow educators and rural blacks and whites. And Margaret Newbold, are you in this room? Margaret Newbold, who was called out earlier, is the granddaughter of Mr. Newbold. So, he had 2 colleagues, William F. Cradle to the right, who was white and had the title supervisor of the Rosenwald Fund, and then George E. Davis, who was black, and he's in the top row in the lower photo, and he was officially the supervisor of Rosenwald buildings. From the beginning, the fund guided school construction with plans and specifications. Tuskegee Institute had prepared plans for the earliest Rosenwald buildings, published in a 1915 pamphlet, The Negro Rural School and Its Relation to the Community, part of which is shown here. By 1916, they were providing a few additional plans that would become ubiquitous by the 1920s. This is the first school that was built in North Carolina with the assistance of the Rosenwald Fund. It was built in 1915. It's the Warren Grove School in Chowan County, and it still stands today, although over the last 30 years it's been flanked by additions that connect it on one side to the adjacent Warren Grove Baptist Church. And I believe later today you're going to be hearing more about Warren Grove. At lower left is the school it replaced. It wasn't until the Nashville office was set up in 1920 that a full series of standardized school plans was developed. The idea was that by providing stock blueprints, any rural community could build a state-of-the-art facility without incurring architect's fees. In 1924, the plans were published as this booklet, which has floor plans and exterior renderings of 17 designs. There were plans for schools ranging in size from 1 to 7 teachers, each with 2 or 3 versions that depended upon their siting, whether or not they were oriented north-south or east-west. And these are some of the most frequently built designs. The one on the to the left is one of the most was one of the most popular. Here are some others. The booklet also included plans and specifications for teachers' homes with 2 or 3 bedrooms, for privies, and also guidance on site size, landscaping, and interior treatment. These were the most up-to-date school designs. They also are notable because they took into account lack of electrification through design and placement of windows, which had to be large and located so they would provide light from the students' left as well as ventilation. They also provided interior color schemes, seating plans, and window shade arrangements specified to make the fullest use of sunlight. Designs reflected the progressive era education thought in 2 ways. One, by uniting the school with the real-life experiences of the community through inclusion of an industrial room, which Dr. Flood talked about. The girls were taught cooking and sewing, and the boys farming and carpentry. And second, through an interior design that encouraged the school's use as a meeting center for the adult community by incorporating an auditorium or movable partition between the classrooms. The exterior architecture was straightforward, with only faint references to the popular cultural colonial revival or craftsman styles evident in the trim or treatment of the roof eaves. All designs in the booklet were one story, and most were sheathed in weatherboards, although quite a few of the larger models were actually built with brick veneer. And from the mid-1920s to the end of the program in 1932, a number of much larger 2- and even 3-story schools were built. While most of North Carolina's Rosenwald schools were built according to the stock plans, there were quite a few exceptions. For example, the Eastman School, no longer standing, which was near Ringwood in western Halifax County, has a familiar floor plan, but its overall proportions, roof pitch, and dormers differ from any of the stock plans. These differences are due to the fact that the building was designed by Edwin S. Gordon, partner in the Rochester, New York firm of Gordon & Kelber, who designed the buildings at George Eastman's 2,900-acre hunting preserve called Oak Lodge. Eastman, who was another friend and supporter of Booker T. Washington, spent 6 weeks there each year, and he took a strong interest in his Halifax County employees, many of whom were African Americans. He donated a 3-acre parcel for this school, and he had his architect customize the stock plans. And he also made the single largest contribution towards the cost of construction. Some Rosenwald school contractors, such as African American Carrie Pittman, put their own stamp on the standard designs. Pittman built at least 30 of Halifax County's 46 schools, more than any other county in the state, and I believe second of any county in the entire South, as well as others in surrounding counties, including this school in Bertie County. Pittman was known for his high-quality buildings as well as the occasional extra stylistic touch. With this background, now I'm just going to shift gears and tell you what we've learned through our architectural survey and National Register programs about North Carolina's Rosenwald schools. First, just a little bit of background on our architectural survey program. In the early 1970s, the North Carolina State Historic Preservation Office began a program of systematic documentation, or surveying, of the state's historic architectural resources. And over the past 5 decades, we've succeeded in comprehensively surveying 84 of our 100 counties and achieving some level of systematic survey in all but 2 of the remaining 16 counties. And I hope I have those statistics correct. In the beginning, we tended to concentrate on buildings constructed prior to 1900, those early buildings that were rapidly disappearing from the landscape. If we were recording early 20th century properties, they usually were the grand and glorious and tended to have been the property of rich white men. With the passage of time, the pool of buildings from more than 50 years ago has mushroomed and our outlook has broadened. By the 1980s, we were recording a wide range of property types, including schools dating to the teens, 20s, and 30s. Documenting the status of all of our 818 Rosenwald projects is a daunting task, and the difficulty of this undertaking is compounded by the fact that there's little readily available documentation to guide us. Thanks in large part to Tom Hanchett's 1988 North Carolina Historical Review article on the history of Rosenwald schools in North Carolina, these schools became a special interest of our office. By 1988, a few of our Rosenwald schools had already been listed in the National Register, mostly because they were scooped up in nominations for historic districts. The C.S. Brown Auditorium in Hertford County was the single exception, and this is a school that Dr. Flood attended, originally called the Waters Training Institute, a training school. It was individually listed in the register in 1985. It was an 8-teacher school, built in 1926 to 27 at a cost of almost $32,000. Actually, it's not just an auditorium, as the name implied, but the entire school, and you should note the attention to style shown by this building. This is one of those exceptions to the rule. In 2000, we were contacted by Ione Collins, who wanted information on North Carolina's Rosenwald schools for an exhibit she was mounting for the country's first regional conference on the schools, which she and others organized and was held in Charlotte in 2001. At that point, we had 12 Rosenwald schools individually listed in the National Register, including this one. In 2002, our office collaborated with Ms. Collins on a couple of programs in Raleigh. At both gatherings, we broadcast a plea for assistance in identifying the extant Rosenwald schools, and that prompted a strong positive response. And soon we developed an organized program of volunteer surveyors overseen by our staff, who also did field work as time permitted. And sadly, this school, Riley Hill School, burned a few years ago and now is in pretty much ruinous condition. Over the last 22 years, dozens of additional Rosenwald schools have been recorded. Starting out, 2 of our most valuable tools were our knowledge of the school designs published by the Rosenwald Fund, so we'd be likely to know one when we saw it, and the invaluable 1930 list of Rosenwald schools compiled by the Department of Public Instruction and printed as an appendix in Dr. Hanchett's article. As you can see, precise locations are not given. Most of the schools are identified by place names, and many of the place names, usually rural, are no longer recognized today. Consequently, finding the schools entails a good bit of sleuthing, including finding and interviewing alumni. And I should add that at least 22 projects from mid-1930 through 1932 are not on that list in the appendix at the back of Tom Hanchett's article. Fisk University has the Rosenwald Fund papers related to the school building program, including a card file on each school, that was digitized and made available online quite a while ago. This database was a huge help due to the photos and other information it contains, but like the Department of Public Instruction list, it did not give precise locations of the schools. And the database was taken down a few years ago, but I think we're going to hear later today about progress that's being made digitizing all of the fund's papers, and we hope that it will be available again soon. The financial data given for each school attests to the fact that time and time again, Blacks managed to meet the required financial match despite very limited means. The program of volunteer Rosenwald school surveyors ebbed and flowed over the years, but yielded impressive results. At the same time, our office has continued to oversee grant-funded county and municipal survey projects that have recorded a number of Rosenwald schools, along with the many other types of historic properties. Also, 2 other projects boosted the survey. In 2005, the North Carolina Department of Transportation hired a consultant, Marvin Brown, to survey all of the extant Rosenwald schools in a 6-county transportation district that had had a total of 126 schools, or 16% of North Carolina's Rosenwald schools, including Halifax County, which, as I noted earlier, had the most schools, 46. And this project produced an extremely thorough report. In the late 2000s, the Conservation Trust, the Conservation Trust for North Carolina, they began the Conservation and Diversity Project with the aim of including a wider range of people in the land trust movement. And I think that was in large part maybe due to Margaret Newbold as well, working with Reed Wilson. And in the process, the Conservation Trust became interested in promoting the preservation of Rosenwald schools. They had summer interns working on Rosenwald-related projects, and in 2010, their intern devoted his time to finding all of the extant schools in Warren County. Warren had 27 schools, and 8 were found that year. In 2015, our office had an intern, a grad student at the University of Vermont, who worked on a variety of Rosenwald school projects, including preparation of a multiple property documentation form on North Carolina's Rosenwald schools. It was accepted by the National Park Service in 2016, and this document simplifies the nomination of schools to the National Register. As of last year, we had files on more than 300 of the 818 Rosenwald schools and related buildings constructed in our state. Slightly more than half of these, 145, have been demolished, leaving about 140 extant, of which at least 6 are ruinous, and others that we haven't seen in a while may now be ruinous or gone altogether. The extant buildings include 42 that have been listed in the National Register. And this is a sampling, including the most recent listing at lower right. There are also 34 schools on what we call our National Register study list, properties that have been evaluated as potentially eligible for listing in the register and thus meriting further study. And later in the session, Sarah Woodard will say more about the National Register. Much of this information and more can be accessed via links on our website. You can go on the landing page of our site to click on architectural surveys, and then architectural survey page, you see the beginning of it at lower right here will appear, and in the sidebar to the right, you can click on Rosenwald schools, and this will come up. And there are numerous links to some of the reports and some of the other material that we have gathered over the years. The Rosenwald Fund's school building program began to wind down in 1928 as the fund moved toward ameliorating the root problems underlying Black inequality, including fellowships to help promising African Americans advance their careers and grants to develop county health agencies and public libraries. The building program ended altogether in 1932, following J.R.'s death. The work to identify, evaluate, and preserve the schools continues. Currently, our office is undertaking a mapping project in an effort to determine the status of all of our 1818 Rosenwald school projects. And Beth King, our survey coordinator, will now tell you about this project.
Hello, everyone. My name is Beth King. I'm the Architectural Survey Coordinator in the State Historic Preservation Office. I'm a co-worker to all of the folks here on the panel. And last year, the Architectural Survey Program was tasked with the responsibility of mapping the more than 800 Rosenwald-funded projects in North Carolina. And this was a little bit of a departure from what we often do in our Architectural Survey Program, because many of our, or most all of our projects are focused on buildings that are still standing, things that we can still go, see, document things that have a good chance of being preserved in a material sense. This is really the first time that we have undertaken a project where we anticipate most of the things that we'll be trying to document are no longer standing. So this requires a different set of skills than the folks who work in our survey program have cultivated through the years. Prior to beginning the task of mapping the 818 Rosenwald funded projects, a few hundred schools had already been documented, as Claudia just covered. And almost all the schools that we have a file for in our archive of places that have been documented in North Carolina are schools that are either standing today or they have been standing within the past 20 to 30 years when they were photographed and a record was created. Most of what we're doing now is researching locations of schools that are no longer standing, and a lot of the schools that we're trying to locate have not been standing for a very long time, or they might be standing, but they might be very overgrown and difficult to locate and not visible to someone who is unfamiliar with the area, is passing through in a car. They're the kind of thing that someone has to take you to see. You're not going to find it by accident. So as you can imagine, the most important and effective resource that we have to do this mapping project is people. Our survey program strives to be people-focused and people-first in every project that we take on. It's at the heart of our mission to go into communities and meet people and find out what's important to our constituents, and to have our survey program reflect the values that we encounter when we start a project in a local area. So of course we want to maintain that same value through this mapping project. We are able to feel the most confident and satisfied with the schools that we have mapped so far when we have someone who's shared firsthand knowledge of where a school either is now or where a school used to be. And the first step that we take when we begin researching a county, we're moving county by county, is that we seek out local historians or interest groups, or maybe printed material. Maybe someone's done a notebook or a book in a local history collection that can give us the boost as we start looking for the location of these schools. And as Claudia mentioned, and as many of you probably know, a lot of the Rosenwald schools had place names attached to them. So you might assume, well, it's at least we know it's in the vicinity of the town that shares its name. But of course, there are many schools that had either they were not given a place name, so to speak, or they were named for a place that is also not a place name that's in circulation now. So that's also a piece of information that's not readily apparent unless we find someone who says, oh yes, this used to be called, this name isn't on the map anymore, but we all used to know it as this, and so the school carried the name of this place that is really hard to discover now. So this is a map of the progress that we've made by far by county. We consider about 33 of our 100 counties to be complete. And complete, of course, is always a really relative word in the survey world, because when we say something's complete, we've done as much as we can. We've turned over as many stones as we can find, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to meet someone a year from now or 10 years from now who's got more information to share. And in that case, we will pull out our working file and we will add to it. As often as we learn more, we will add more to our files. But these 33 counties are the ones where we've turned over as many stones as we can find, and we feel relatively confident that we've been able to locate the schools certainly the schools that are standing, but hopefully even the schools that are gone and have been gone for a very long time. If we consider one of these counties complete, it means we've also created a paper file for each one, which is stored along with the rest of our survey collection in the basement of the Archives and History building on Jones Street, and is publicly available. And we also, because it's the 21st century, have a digital record of some kind. In these 33 counties, there are roughly 200 schools. Of course, you can see that we've completed many of the western counties, and so there are a lot of counties included that might have only had one Rosenwald school. But you can also see that the cluster of counties that are further towards the east are some of the counties that had the very most Rosenwald schools. So even though the geographic area in the west looks bigger, that represents about 52 schools, and the purple areas further to the east represent about 140 schools. We use deed research, historic photographs, and especially aerial images to help us find schools that are no longer standing. And as I said, if we can find someone who says, well, as I understand it, it was at the junction of these two roads, then we can go to aerial photographs that start to become really common in the 1950s. And we can often find, the roof of that school, because at that time we were just getting into an era where some of those schools were being, the county system was selling the school buildings. They were moving into more consolidated schools, moving away from local schools. But because we have so many aerial photographs in North Carolina from the 1950s, we can often get that school right as it's maybe transitioning out of being an active school for those schools that were consolidating at that time. Northampton is one of the counties that we consider to be complete, although we're certainly always accepting more information and more material. And so I wanted to just give you a sense of what this will look like when we're finished. This is our GIS web map called HPO Web, and it contains all of the things that we've surveyed across the state, but it is searchable specifically by Rosenwald School. And this is the kind of information that we hope to be able to present to people through this project, that you can see the pinpoint of how the distribution of Rosenwald schools in any given county. Or if you're more interested in just one local area inside the county, you could zoom in even further. If you were to look at one of these individual points, this is the information that you would get. The really valuable thing here is the unique survey site number. In this case, it's NP661. And if you know that number, we can provide for you the photographs and the archival material that we have in our archives by that reference number. And you can get a little bit of information from the tag that's here. So as you can imagine, it's been very challenging and time-consuming, but very rewarding to locate buildings that aren't standing anymore. So one thing that we really hope to do today, when we have this forum of so many people who are interested and knowledgeable about Rosenwald schools, is we would love for anyone to participate in this program. We would be really honored to have involvement from the folks that are here today. So if you are an expert in a particular county or a particular part of a county, or you just know and love one school that you think, particularly if it's something that's not very visible from the public right-of-way, or one that's not standing anymore, we would really love to hear from you so that we can really improve the accuracy of this project. If you are interested in participating, I'll be here all day, and I'd love to meet you and talk to you. But I've also put my contact information here so that you have it. If we don't have a chance to talk today, you can reach me later. I'd also invite you to look at our GIS web service, HPO Web. And the easiest way to do that, I find, is to Google HPO Web 2.0. There's a very long URL that's cumbersome to get straight there. But this takes you to our whole GIS web service. And from there, you can zoom into an area you're interested in. There are some search tools that you can use. And if you find this service difficult to navigate, you have my contact information, and I'll be glad to help you find what you're looking for in that area. So it's been a real pleasure to work on this project so far. We anticipate, based on the progress that we made over a year, that we'll probably be working on this for another 2 to 3 years to come. And we'd really love to have as much participation as possible, and very grateful for the opportunity to present this to you today and to hopefully solicit interest and participation. So thank you.
Right. Good morning. I am Sarah Woodard. I'm the branch supervisor for the National Register and Architectural Survey Program. I'm also recovering from a sinus infection, so I hope will be able to hear me for the full time. And before I jump in real quick, Beth's project is, well, a lot of this work that we're doing is standing on the shoulders, of course, of Claudia Brown's efforts. She's still our main Rosenwald champion within our office. And then Beth's sort of right-hand assistants on the mapping project have been Rebecca Spanbauer and Audrey Thomas. Audrey's not with us, but Rebecca's here. And Rebecca, right behind you is a lady named Cheryl Carroll, who is from Warren County. And Rebecca's working on Warren County right now, so y'all need to chat a little bit. And then we also have our GIS analyst here, Andy Edmonds, and he is all things mapping to us. So I'm going to give you a quick overview, as quick as I can, of the steps involved in getting a Rosenwald school listed in the National Register of Historic Places. I'm going to go pretty quickly. I'm going to throw a lot of words at you, but you can get a copy of this presentation, which includes my script, and I think all the presentations you'll be able to get copies of, and it's being recorded, so you will be able to access this later. And to reiterate something that Beth and Claudia have said, and I know Brett will say as well, any questions, call us, email us, come see us. So the first step to getting on the National Register is getting on the state study list. The study list is a vetted list of resources that our National Register Advisory Committee thinks might make good candidates for the National Register. Well, but wait. A lot of Rosenwalds are already on the study list, so you want to really start by checking your building status. And to do this, you can go to the map that we all keep referring to. And you can also, again, always call us. We can look this up for you or help you learn to use it. Andy's got tutorials. We want you to get on this map and use it and play with it, basically. But if you want to search for a particular school, you can click on the red arrow at the bottom, and you'll pull up this window, and you can enter your school name. Now, I chose to show you by school name, which was probably not smart because people keep mentioning rightly that the names are in flux a lot. So this is probably not actually the best way to search, but again, we can help you. And then you would click apply, and this would take you, in this case, to the Newell Rosenwald School, which is down in Mecklenburg County. And if we get close to it, we can see it's in green, and that means it's on the study list. So this one's already done, yay. You can also barely see a little magenta outline behind the green square, and that means it's also been protected with local landmark designation, which I will cover at the end of this. And then the orange dot on Torrance Grove, AME Zion, means that we have an architectural survey file on that building. So Newell Rosenwald is on the study list. If nothing really has changed with it since it got on the study list, you can move forward with a nomination. But if your search leads you to a school that's not already on the study list, so this is Maple Hill School, then you're going to have to go with step 2 and get it on the study list. Naturally, because we are the government, the study list involves a form. You'll use this form to give us some basic history of your building and some updated photographs of it. And this will usually is part of a conversation with someone in our office. And often someone from our office will schedule a time to come see the building with you and take a look at it in person. You don't need to be a professional historian to do this. You don't need to provide an exhaustive history. And again, we're here to help you. So just don't give up on it. Give us a call. Now, not every Rosenwald is going to be a good candidate for the study list. This is the Maple Hill School that we just zoomed in on the map. And as you can see, it's actually attached to a church building, and it's been heavily remodeled so that it blends in or connects with the church more stylistically. But there are schools out there that aren't on the study list yet that would make good candidates. So if you get your building on the study list, if it's already on there, if we can help you get it on there, then we head to step 3, which is preparation of a nomination document. The nomination document addresses 2 basic questions. Why is the school important, and does it look like it did when it became important? Actually, there's really 3 questions. There's one hidden in there in question 2, which is when was it important? And that's the period of significance. That's the time in which the resource became important. And for most Rosenwalds, that's probably going to be the length of time it operated as a school. Okay, really, there's 4. I had fun playing with my chalk thing on on my presentation. Where is the resource? And that's going to be a pretty easy question to answer, especially now that Beth and her team have been digging into locations. And that will be a map that's part of your nomination. So the first question, why is this important? Well, for Rosenwalds, it's pretty easy to answer. Thanks to Claudia's efforts and the intern many years ago, back in 2015 or so, we have this multiple property documentation form. This is a form that's part of the National Register program, and it provides a basic background history of Rosenwalds in North Carolina, and that allows you to sort of use that as a springboard for your individual nomination. It sort of allows you to cut out some of the research and writing that would cover the broad category, and so you can jump straight to your particular history. So basically, most school buildings in North Carolina are going to be assumed to have a significance with education in that community. And Rosenwalds usually are going to also have an association with Black history. And for those that retain a lot of historic fabric and have undergone minimal alteration, they might be considered significant in the area of architecture. And this is Walnut Cove Colored School in Stokes County. Do we have anybody here from there? Just checking. I grew up about 5 miles away from there. And of course, each school has its own unique history, so there could be some other historical significance areas that are particular to your school. So the next question, does this building look like it did when it became important? And that's where things can get a little dicey. To be listed, a building needs to retain enough historic integrity to express its historic significance. So what is historic integrity? The National Register gives us lots of words, more words. They define that as a combination of 7 aspects of integrity. So to be listed, a resource might not retain all of these elements, but it must retain enough, to convey that significance. So in the case of Rosenwalds, does the building retain enough integrity to communicate its educational significance, or its significance in architecture, or its significance in Black history? So some of them are really cut and dry, like location. That's a real straight yes or no. But then feeling and association can get a little squishy. So again, for Rosenwalds, we know they're historically significant. So jumping right to integrity, these 2 schools, they're both in Bertie County. One of them, they're both historically significant, but one of them has lost a lot of integrity of materials, workmanship, and design, and is probably not going to be a good study list candidate. The other one also deteriorated, but at least from the exterior, it appears to retain a lot more of its historic material, like its actual physical fabric. Another example, the one on the left, it has been altered. It looks like it's probably been used as a house at some point. Some of the windows are boarded up. But from the exterior, it does appear to retain enough historic integrity to convey its significance in the areas of education and Black history. I mean, you can look at that and tell it's a school. And if you know Rosenwald's, you look at that and you can probably know it's a Rosenwald. But the other one, the one on the right, it's in better shape. I mean, it's been maintained, but it's lost a lot of integrity of materials, workmanship, design, feeling, and association. So it's probably not going to be a good candidate. So when was the building important? That one's pretty easy for Rosenwald's. Again, most of the time it's going to be the length of time, the period of time it operated as a school. And the easiest for the last, again, where is the building? And that's going to be a map that's included in your nomination. So the other method of designating your school as historic is using your local Historic Preservation Commission's Historic Landmark Program. So our office oversees the National Register program. The local programs are just that, they're local. They vary slightly from place to place, and not every city or county will have one of these programs. So you can call us with questions about local programs, but mostly we're going to probably redirect you to that municipality or that county. The local designation process will involve writing a report. It doesn't have to be as detailed or as expansive as the National Register nomination, but you are going to be expected to justify or explain why this building ought to receive local designation. Local designation criteria often follow the National Register criteria, but they also usually have a little more flexibility. So this is a really good way to create some recognition for a building that might not be eligible for the National Register. Two big differences in the programs. National Register designation is honorary. It comes with no restrictions or protections, and those are the same thing, just depends on your point of view. Unless there's federally funded or a federally licensed project taking place at or near that resource, or if the owner is going to use it for income producing project and they want to take advantage of the tax credit program, that would come with some restrictions. The local designation program provides a lot more protection, again, or imposes more restrictions, again, your perspective, through regulation. Owners would need to get permission from the local preservation commission before making major changes to the building. So those are the two main programs in North Carolina, local designation and the National Register program. Call us anytime with any question. And we have county service territories, so if you call me, I may redirect you to somebody, but we will, we're available to help you and eager to help. So, and with that, I will turn it over to Brett.
I am a bit of a stand-in this morning, and I'm privileged to be here speaking at this event and with some of my absolute favorite esteemed colleagues from the HPO. My name is Brett Sturm. I'm a restoration specialist with the State Historic Preservation Office, and so I represent what we call the Restoration Services branch, or Restoration Services team. The State Historic Preservation Office, in our mission statement, we have a couple verbs. Identify, protect, and enhance, I believe, are the operative verbs. And so what we've been hearing a lot so far in this session from my survey colleagues pertains to identifying and protecting historic resources. The Restoration Services branch, we're on the protection and enhancement side of the coin. And so I'm a stand-in today because my colleague, Jennifer Cathy, based in our Asheville office, was going to share with you a wonderful case study of Rosenwald School restoration here at the Anderson Rosenwald School in Mars Hill. And Secretary Wilson mentioned this project in his remarks this morning. I'm still going to present that case study. I should mention Jennifer Cathy's in Asheville this morning. She's been dealing with a lot of constituent service in the wake of Hurricane Helene. And so I'm based here in our Raleigh office. I serve generally the central Piedmont counties of the state. And so I said, no problem, Jennifer, send me some pics and I will jump in and speak. I have been with the office for about 7 years. now, and there's there's 6 of us that divide. We got 1 vacancy currently, but there's 6 of us that divide the 100 counties into service districts. And I often compare our group to the Agricultural Extension Service. Like, you can call them up and ask questions about planting your garden. Well, you can call us up and ask questions about maintaining your historic building. We work with properties of all shapes and sizes, properties that are on the National Register and not on the National Register, that are locally designated and not. And so, in fact, historic buildings encompass really everything that's built, right? Because history is happening every day. So if you have even a building from the 70s or the 80s, you could call me to ask me questions about how to keep it healthy. So in my time, I've consulted with 2 different Rosenwald School restoration projects, and I'm going to have a couple slides at the very end that show you one of those 2 schools. When Jennifer sent me the information on the Anderson School, I was just blown away. I've never been to this project personally. Is there anyone in the audience representing this school, this project? Okay, yeah, a little round of applause. I'm going to show you just a few photos and recount kind of the timeline but please jump in if you have any additional comments or corrections to provide. I was just really blown away by learning more about this project and seeing the photographs, and it reminded me a bit of the projects I've consulted on and inspired me about those projects and future projects that we'll see. So here's a historic photograph of the Anderson Rosenwald School, built in 1928. I'm not sure which plan this one is. I don't know if it's 1A, but it is I believe a single room. Is it 1 room or 2 room? Plan 20. Okay. Plan number 20. Another historic photograph showing students perched on the stoop, and I love the sort of the vibe here with the modern photograph of folks who have gathered to restore. I had to put these one after the other because it's just one privilege with our work around the state, and this is especially true in the wake of Hurricane Helene in our mountain counties, is that you get the sense of how historic buildings are vehicles for community, for that word that we hear so much nowadays. Vehicles for people to come together under a common purpose. In this case of Rosenwald schools, often with shared memories and pride for what the buildings represent. So I just love kind of the performance of restoration is really engaging with the past and with the memory of the past. This project in Mars Hill, the seeds of this project go back to 2009, 2010. So a local friends group was formed, alumni of the school, community members, folks who wanted to see this building restored, and I understand that the first SHPO site visit occurred in 2010. And I've myself have been on a few different visits that these photos reminded me of. When you arrive on site at a historic school that has sat for in some cases decades. Often these buildings may have been converted for other uses, for residential use, for business use. I visited a Rosenwald era school in Mecklenburg County that you'll hear about later today that had been converted for use as an auto repair shop, which posed some structural challenges because they had installed a garage door and a window opening. But these are very resilient buildings. And typically with a wood frame building from the 20s, if the thing stays dry, it's going to last. So like I tell folks, I went to school to become a conservator of architecture, studying how building materials degrade. But frankly, if you have ever worked with plants, like planted a garden, and you understand that water is necessary for life and that water travels downhill, then you're half the way to becoming an architectural conservator, because keeping water away from your wood frame building keeps it from turning into topsoil, basically. So a lot of these buildings, if kept relatively dry and ventilated, will endure for many years, even if they're not being used. So these were the before photos there in Mars Hill. Let's see, so rehab plans were put together around 2010, Scott Donald, architect, Paget and Freeman Architects, drew up the restoration plans shown on the left, and work began. 2015, restoration work started. And what is interesting to me in the notes that Jennifer provided was the years-long engagement with this project. Things don't happen overnight. Buildings don't deteriorate overnight, but they also often don't get restored overnight. It takes a village and it takes creativity in terms of linking together funding sources. It was so interesting to me that Secretary Wilson, as a land conservation guy, recounted his memories of kind of being persuaded to support a project like this, which I love. I love speaking with environmental conservators and land conservators and trying to convince them that historic buildings were all under the same tent, under the same umbrella. And this project really seems to have exemplified that kind of creativity and stitching together multiple funding sources and being persuasive that this project mattered. In 2017, the Friends Group attended a National Trust for Historic Preservation workshop, providing advice on how to get a project like this off the ground. And that, I think, is another great lesson for folks restoring a school, is getting out there and networking with other folks who are facing the same challenges. In 2018, the building was listed in the National Register of Historic Places. So they went through the process that Sarah's teacherly slides told us about. I loved your graphics, Sarah. I'm gonna have to borrow that. And the group, beyond all those steps, it seems was really rigorous about investigating the surviving historic materials and using that evidence, of physical evidence, to inform the steps they took to restore the building. And so they even did a paint analysis on the beadboard. So this is beadboard taken from either the ceiling or the walls, and they took samples of the accumulated paint layers and studied that to understand what all the original colors were. So very intensive job. 2022, it was complete. And so I've not had the privilege of visiting this site. Next time I'm in Madison County, I'm going to check it out. It's operated as an educational center, an interpretive center for Rosenwald history, and as a community meeting place. And I checked out the website. It's very impressive. They've got a book that they published on the project and on the history of the school. So just really cool. I sent Jennifer a text thanking her for asking me to fill in for her, because I got to learn about this. Just very briefly, I'll show you a few slides from a project I've been consulting on in the past 3 years, give or take, in Lincoln County. This is the Mount Vernon Rosenwald School and near Iron Station. Anyone familiar with this project? Is Ola May here? Ola May's not here? Okay. Ola May has been my primary contact there, along with Mia Canistrari, who's a tireless volunteer helping the group. This is a beautiful building that, like many Rosenwald schools, has seen some alterations. So this is what Mount Vernon looked like the first time I visited. The form of the building is still intact. It's very obviously a historic schoolhouse. But as you can see, the windows have been altered. Vinyl siding installed, under which the original wood siding survives. Here's a view of the back, the rear elevation of the church, these beautiful windows oriented to let in morning light. And then those are big window units. Takes a good bit of effort over the years to maintain those and keep those in good shape. Oftentimes you'll see them infilled or covered up with other materials. And that had been the case on the rear elevation. This is what the building looked like on the interior when I first visited. And again, to make buildings easier to heat, usually in the 70s or 80s, ceilings were dropped. And so the first time I walked in there, I said, well, let's poke our heads up above that drop ceiling and see what's there, see if we can find the old building hiding underneath. And lo and behold, the beadboard walls were behind the 1960s era paneling, as well as the beadboard ceiling. So the next time I visited, the group had gotten a grant from Lowe's Home Improvement and had removed all that material on the inside. And that was really step one. My advice was take it slower on the outside, because as soon as you take that vinyl siding off, your wood siding will be exposed to weather again. You know, sometimes those building coverings, we call them slip covers, can actually buy you a little bit of time, provided that the building is dry underneath. So news of the Anderson Rosenwald restoration, I see a lot of parallels with the group in Iron Station. And so hopefully y'all who are present here today can meet one another and trade notes. It's not easy, this type of work. It takes persistence, it takes creativity, but it's so rewarding, and it's a great way to come together and honor this history. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I guess at this point we have some time for questions. The floor does survive in this building. Mm-hmm.
So I've been asked to repeat the question. Will you please correct me if I, or do we have a microphone that can circulate? Okay.
Verifying or identifying if it's needed a Rosenwald school, or are these sites that are on your list ones that have already been identified?
So Claudia mentioned that the lists that we've depended on in the past is that 1930s, Claudia, correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but the 1930s Board of Education list of Rosenwald funded projects.
Yeah.
So, and then there were some that were done in 31 and 32 as well. So combining both that 1930 list from the North Carolina Board of Education plus the projects that were done over the next 2 years after it was compiled. So that's one method that we have of identifying what received funding from the Rosenwald Fund. It wasn't just, a lot of schools looked very similar to Rosenwald schools but did not receive the funding.
Got it.
So we've used that list. And then Fisk, I meant to thank them when I was giving my presentation, so I'm glad you're giving me the opportunity now. Fisk University, their staff was really kind to send me the scanned Rosenwald Fund cards. And so every project in North Carolina that received money, and sometimes that was a building and sometimes it was a library, meaning a collection of books rather than a room or a building. There's a card for that that Fisk holds now from the Rosenwald Fund. And so the combination of the Board of Education records and then those cards that Fisk sent me that identify how much money was allocated to each project in North Carolina, that's been the basis for how we've been able to say, yes, this appears to have been a school that received Rosenwald funding. And I will say that there have been a few cases where we've been looking at a school and we have determined that it does not seem to be part of the Rosenwald funded projects. But we're there, so we go ahead and give it a site number anyway. And so if we're going down a rabbit hole and we're researching a school and it turns out that it is not affiliated with the fund, we try to go ahead and create that record anyway, because we've put the effort in and it's something that deserves to be mapped and understood better.
After the fund stopped assisting in construction of schools in 1932, the Department of Public Construction made all those plans available to anybody. So there are a number of schools, quite a few schools that we've identified over the years, built in the 30s and even the early 40s that look just like Rosenwald schools, but they aren't. We consider them to be Rosenwald schools only if they got the funding.
I just want to make sure that I understand this correctly. You said there were 7 counties in North Carolina that did not have Rosenwald schools. 6 were in the west and 1 was Granville County? Okay, all right, thank you.
So in the interest of time, I am going to cut us off in terms of the questions, but I do encourage you all to connect with the presenters. Many of them shared their email addresses, and we'll be sure to share those out to you all following the closing of this convening so that you can have that easy at hand.